Chapter 1, The Morning Shift. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar song at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Sarah Chen's alarm was set to ring. She'd learned years ago that waking to the smell of coffee was gentler than waking to sound, so she'd programmed the machine accordingly. Small mercies, her mother used to say. Life is built on small mercies. Sarah silenced her phone before the alarm could break the pre-dawn quiet and sat at her kitchen table, both hands wrapped around the mug, letting the ceramic warmth seep into her palms. Through the window above her sink, she could see the orange glow of streetlights still fighting against the approaching sunrise. In another hour, the neighborhood would wake, garage doors groaning open, school buses hissing to stops, the Hendersons' dog barking at absolutely nothing. But for now, this pocket of silence belonged to her alone. She was 43 years old, though people often guessed younger. Not because she looked particularly youthful, but because there was something unfinished about her, something that hadn't quite settled. Her ex-husband Mark had once told her, during one of their last real conversations, that she had the face of someone still waiting for life to start. He'd meant it as criticism. She'd chosen to hear it as hope. The house felt too large around her now, especially in these early hours. 3 bedrooms for one person. Mark had taken most of the furniture when he left, not out of spite, he'd insisted, but because his new apartment needed filling and she told him she wanted a fresh start anyway. That had been 2 years ago. The fresh start remained theoretical. She'd bought a new couch, sage green, which she'd found on sale. It sat in the living room like a monument to intention, still bearing the slight chemical smell of the factory. Sarah worked as a medical technician at the VA hospital in Richmond, Virginia. 15 years she'd been drawing blood, running tests, filing results into the vast bureaucratic machinery of veterans' healthcare. It wasn't the career she'd imagined in college, when she'd started as a pre-med student with dreams of surgery and research. But life, as it tends to do, had rerouted her. Student loans. Her father's stroke. Mark's better opportunity that required moving away from the university. Each detour had seemed temporary at the time. She'd looked up one day and found herself here, in this life, and it was fine. Not the dream, but fine. Stable. Meaningful, even, in its way. She'd developed relationships with some of the regular patients, the ones who came in monthly for monitoring, who recognized her face and asked about her weekend. Hector Rodriguez, who'd served in Desert Storm and still wore his unit ball cap to every appointment. Jennifer Walsh, younger than Sarah, a veteran of Iraq who never talked about her service but always thanked Sarah for being gentle with the needle. These small connections mattered. They weren't friendships, exactly, but they were something. Proof that she existed in the world as more than just a function. The coffee was cooling. She drank it anyway, scrolling through her phone without really seeing it. News headlines blurred together, political scandals, weather warnings, celebrity nonsense. She'd stopped reading most of it. The world felt too large and too angry, and she'd learned that her sanity required boundaries. She checked the weather instead. 68 degrees. Partly cloudy. A pleasant October day. She showered, dressed in her usual scrubs, navy blue, practical, with pockets deep enough for pens and alcohol wipes and the small notepad she used to track her daily tasks. She'd learned early in her career that memory couldn't be trusted during a 12-hour shift. Write everything down. Double check. Triple check. In medicine, mistakes weren't abstract. They had names and faces and families. The drive to the hospital took 35 minutes in morning traffic. Sarah had the route memorized in a way that transcended conscious thought: turn here, merge there, watch for the pothole near the overpass. She listened to NPR, though lately she found herself zoning out during the political segments, tuning back in only when they switched to human interest stories. This morning, a piece about a community garden in Baltimore, neighbors coming together to transform a vacant lot. Small mercies, she thought again. The VA hospital loomed ahead, a sprawling complex of tan brick buildings that had been expanded piecemeal over decades. The architecture told the story of bureaucracy, budgets approved and cut, projects started and stalled, optimistic additions giving way to pragmatic renovations. Sarah parked in her usual spot, row K, space 17. She'd been parking there for so long that pulling in elsewhere would feel like a betrayal of routine. Inside, the hospital smelled of industrial disinfectant and something else, something harder to name. Institutional anxiety, maybe. The accumulated worry of thousands of people who'd passed through these halls seeking help, seeking answers, seeking relief. Sarah badged in at security, "Morning, Terry," and took the elevator to the third floor. The laboratory was already humming with activity. Dr. Patricia Okafor stood at the main workstation, reviewing printouts with the concentrated frown she wore during her first coffee of the day. She glanced up as Sarah entered. "Chen. Good. We've got a full board today. When don't we?" Sarah hung her coat in her locker, pulled on her lab coat. Patricia smiled briefly. She was 56, originally from Nigeria, and had been the head of the department for 8 years. She ran the lab with a mixture of precision and compassion that Sarah deeply respected. Patricia had once told her that the best medical professionals were the ones who never forgot that every test result represented a human being waiting, hoping, fearing. "True enough," Patricia said. "But today we also have the new study participants coming in." Sarah paused, glancing back. "New study? The memo went out last week. I forwarded it to you." Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling back through her work email. There it was, subject line, "New DoD Research Initiative, Patient Intake Schedule." She'd seen it, she realized, but had skimmed it, filed it mentally under administrative noise. "Sorry," she said. "I must have missed the details." Patricia's frown deepened slightly, but she nodded. "Basically, it's a DoD-funded research project. Long-term health monitoring of veterans exposed to various environmental factors during service. They're looking at Gulf War syndrome, burn pit exposure, that sort of thing. We've been selected as one of 20 sites nationwide." "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "And we're doing what, exactly?" "Blood draws, urinalysis, basic workup. We collect the samples, send them to a secure facility for analysis. Pretty standard stuff. They're starting with about 30 participants here, with more rolling in over the next few months." "Secure facility? DoD contractor?" "The memo has all the details." Patricia handed her a packet of papers. "Your first appointment is at 8:30. Michael Brennan. He's one of the study coordinators, actually, not a participant. He'll walk you through the protocols." Sarah took the packet, flipping through. Official letterhead, dense paragraphs of text, consent forms. It looked legitimate, thoroughly bureaucratic. She'd worked on research studies before, academic projects, pharmaceutical trials. This seemed similar, if more security conscious. "Is there anything unusual about the protocols?" she asked. Patricia shook her head. "Not that I can see. Draw samples, label them according to their coding system, log everything carefully. They're very particular about chain of custody, but that makes sense given it's DoD funded. National security implications, you know." National security. The phrase hung in the air for a moment, vague and heavy. "All right," Sarah said. "I'll read through this before he gets here." The morning moved quickly, as mornings in the lab always did. Sarah processed her regular patients, moving through the familiar rhythm of preparing needles, tying tourniquets, finding veins. She chatted with Hector about his granddaughter's soccer games. She was gentle with Jennifer, who always tensed at the sight of needles, and distracted her with questions about her dog. At 8:25, she retreated to the small break room to review the study materials. The consent form was 12 pages long, dense with medical terminology and legal disclaimers. Participants acknowledged that samples would be used for research purposes, that data might be shared with government agencies, that privacy would be maintained to the fullest extent consistent with applicable law and national security requirements. That phrase again. National security. Sarah had never thought much about national security in concrete terms. It existed as an abstraction, something invoked on the news, used to justify budgets and policies. But here, in her hands, it had form. Paperwork. Protocols. A coding system that would strip names from samples, reducing human beings to alphanumeric sequences. She supposed it made sense. These were veterans, after all. Many had security clearances, had served in classified capacities. Of course their medical data would require protection. At 8:32, her phone buzzed. A text from the front desk, Michael Brennan had arrived. Sarah found him in the waiting area, a man in his late 40s with graying hair cut military short and glasses that caught the fluorescent light. He wore khakis and a polo shirt with a small embroidered logo she didn't recognize, some kind of eagle clutching arrows. "Mr. Brennan," she extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen." His handshake was firm, practiced. "Ms. Chen. Thank you for meeting with me. I know Dr. Okafor briefed you on the basics." She did. "I've reviewed the materials." "Excellent." His smile was professional, revealing nothing. "Why don't we step into one of the exam rooms? I'd like to walk you through the sample collection process in detail." They settled into exam room 3, Sarah in her usual chair, Brennan perched on the exam table in the spot normally reserved for patients. He pulled a tablet from his bag and navigated through screens with the ease of someone who spent his life interfacing with technology. "The key thing to understand," he began, "is that this study is critical for understanding long-term health impacts on our service members. We've had anecdotal reports for years, Gulf War syndrome, symptoms from burn pit exposure, unexplained illnesses. But we've lacked comprehensive, longitudinal data. This study aims to change that." Sarah nodded. It sounded reasonable. Important, even. "The protocols are straightforward," Brennan continued. "Standard blood draw, we need about 30 milliliters. Urinalysis. Basic vitals. What's crucial is the labeling and documentation. Each participant has been assigned a unique identifier. You'll use that instead of their name on all samples and forms." He showed her the coding system, 3 letters, 4 numbers, seemingly random. No indication of what site the sample came from, no way to trace it back to an individual without access to the master database. "This is about privacy?" Sarah asked. "Privacy and security," Brennan confirmed. "Some of these veterans served in sensitive roles. Some have ongoing clearances. We need to ensure their medical data can't be compromised or leaked. I'm sure you understand." She did. Or thought she did. "Once you've collected and labeled the samples, they go into these containers." He produced a small foam-lined box, military gray, with a biohazard symbol and a combination lock. "You'll place them here, log the collection in this tablet." He handed her a device, "and the courier will pick them up every evening at 6 p.m. "Every evening?" "Every evening," Brennan confirmed. "Time-sensitive analysis. Some of the biomarkers we're looking for degrade quickly." "Where do the samples go?" "A DoD contractor facility in Maryland. Fully accredited, biosafety level 3. Everything by the book." He smiled again, that professional smile. "I know this probably seems like a lot of security theater, but with government funding comes government regulations. You know how it is." Sarah did know. Bureaucracy created its own gravity, its own elaborate rituals. She'd spent 15 years navigating it. They spent another 20 minutes going over details. Emergency contacts. What to do if a participant had questions she couldn't answer. How to handle adverse reactions or complications. It was all standard, all reasonable. "Any questions?" Brennan asked finally. Sarah hesitated. There was something she wanted to ask, though she couldn't quite articulate why it nagged at her. The participants, she said slowly. They've all been fully informed. They understand what they're consenting to. Brennan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Brief. Almost imperceptible. Absolutely, he said. Every participant has signed comprehensive consent forms. They've been briefed extensively. This is all voluntary, Ms. Chen. These are Americans who want to contribute to research that might help their fellow veterans. They're patriots. The word landed strangely. Patriots. As if that settled everything, answered all possible questions. Of course, Sarah said. I just wanted to be sure. I understand. You care about your patients. That's exactly why we wanted VA hospitals for this study. We need people who see these veterans as human beings, not just data points. He stood, extending his hand again. Thank you for your time. Your first study participant is scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. His identifier is BTR 4472. Everything you need is in the tablet. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the exam room for a few minutes. The space felt different somehow, though nothing had changed. Same beige walls, same posters about healthy eating and mental health resources, same faint smell of antiseptic. She thought about Patricia's words, national security implications. She thought about Brennan's smile, professional and unrevealing. She thought about the phrase in the consent form, to the fullest extent consistent with applicable law and national security requirements. Outside, in the hallway, a patient laughed at something a nurse had said. Life continued, ordinary and familiar. Sarah stood, smoothing her scrubs, and returned to work. She had blood to draw, tests to run, results to file. The rhythm of her days had always been her anchor. She saw no reason for that to change. The first participant would arrive tomorrow. She would treat him with the same care she gave all her patients. She would follow the protocols. She would do her job. It was all for a good cause, after all. National security. Helping veterans. Research that mattered. They'd said so, and she had no reason to doubt them. Not yet. Chapter 2, Small Inconsistencies. The first participant arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other. Sarah had reviewed his file, what little there was of it. BTR 4472. Male, age 47, Gulf War veteran. No name. Just the code. When she called the identifier into the waiting room, a thin man with sun-weathered skin stood up. He moved slowly, favoring his left leg, and his eyes had that particular exhaustion Sarah had learned to recognize. Not just tiredness. Something deeper. Right this way, she said, keeping her voice warm. The man nodded but didn't speak. In the exam room, she walked him through the basics. Blood pressure. Temperature. Heart rate. All routine. His vitals were slightly elevated, blood pressure running high, pulse a bit quick, but nothing alarming. Stress, most likely. People were often nervous in medical settings. I'm going to draw some blood now, she explained, preparing her equipment. You'll feel a small pinch. I know the drill, he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't used it much lately. Sarah found his vein easily. He had good veins, probably from years of military physicals and VA appointments, and drew the required amount. 30 milliliters into 3 separate vials, each labeled with his identifier code. She worked efficiently, applying pressure to the puncture site, bandaging it with practiced care. All done. Any questions about the study? The man hesitated. They said this was going to help other vets. Figure out what's making us sick. That's right, Sarah confirmed. Long-term health monitoring. Environmental exposure research. Environmental exposure. He repeated the words like he was testing their weight. Yeah. That's what they called it over there too. Environmental factors. Something in his tone made Sarah pause, but before she could respond, he stood, thanked her quietly, and left. She logged the samples in the tablet Brennan had provided, placed them in the locked container, and moved on to her next patient. Regular patients. Familiar faces. Hector was back for his monthly check, cheerful as always despite his chronic pain. The rhythm of routine pulled her forward. But that evening, as she prepared to leave, she found herself thinking about BTR 4472. About the way he'd said, environmental factors. About the exhaustion in his eyes. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah processed 11 more study participants. Each arrived with just their identifier code. Each had the same slightly elevated vitals, the same particular weariness. Some were chatty, grateful for the study, hopeful it would lead to answers. Others were quiet, going through the motions with military efficiency. On the third week, something small changed. The participant scheduled for Wednesday morning didn't show up. Sarah waited 15 minutes past the appointment time, then checked with the front desk. They had no record of a cancellation call. Did he reschedule? She asked. The receptionist shook her head. Nothing in the system. Want me to call him? We don't have his number, Sarah realized. Just the identifier code. The receptionist frowned, clicking through screens. That's weird. Usually there's contact info even for research studies. How are we supposed to send appointment reminders? The study coordinator handles all that, Sarah said, though the answer felt inadequate even as she spoke it. She texted the number Brennan had given her for questions. The response came 30 minutes later, participant withdrew from study. New appointment scheduled for same slot next week. No explanation. No details. Sarah found herself checking the locked sample container more frequently. The courier arrived every evening at exactly 6 p.m., always the same person, a woman in her 30s with short dark hair and a professional demeanor who never made small talk. She would verify the seal, scan a barcode, and leave with the box. The entire interaction took less than 2 minutes. One evening, Sarah asked, "Where exactly do these go?" The courier looked up, expression neutral. "Maryland facility. It's all in your documentation." "Right, but which facility specifically?" "The address is classified, ma'am." "Security protocols." She said it matter-of-factly, then left with the samples. Classified. Everything was classified or coded or secured behind layers of protocol. Patricia noticed Sarah's distraction during their Friday staff meeting. "Everything okay with the DoD study?" "Fine," Sarah said. It's a lot of security for a health monitoring study, isn't it?" Patricia shrugged. "Government work. They're probably worried about HIPAA violations, liability issues. You know how risk-averse they are." That made sense. It should have satisfied Sarah's vague unease. But that night, lying in bed in her too-large house, she found herself thinking about BTR 4472 again. About his hoarse voice. About the way none of the participants ever seemed surprised by the elaborate security measures, as if they'd expected nothing less. As if they'd been through this before. She told herself she was overthinking it. Reading patterns into randomness. Her ex-husband had accused her of that during their marriage, seeing problems where none existed, he'd said. Creating drama from boredom. But Sarah had learned to trust her instincts, even when she couldn't articulate why something felt wrong. And something about this study, buried beneath all the reasonable explanations and official protocols, felt wrong. She just didn't know why yet. Chapter 3, The Man Who Remembered. It was a Thursday in early November when David Sullivan walked into the lab, and everything Sarah had been trying not to notice suddenly demanded attention. He was participant KLM 8831, according to the tablet. 51 years old, Marine Corps veteran. The file said nothing else, but the man himself said volumes before he even spoke. His hands trembled slightly as he filled out the preliminary paperwork. His eyes moved constantly, scanning the room like he was mapping exits. When Sarah introduced herself, he flinched at the sound of her voice. "Sorry," he said immediately. "Sorry. It's been a rough week." "That's okay," Sarah said gently. "Take your time. There's no rush." In the exam room, she went through the standard protocols. Blood pressure, 148/95. Elevated. Pulse, 98. Also high. His hands continued their slight tremor as she worked. "Mr. Sullivan." "David," he interrupted. "Please. Just David." "David," she corrected. "I notice you seem anxious. Is this about the blood draw, or is there something else I should know about?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's funny? I volunteered for this. Saw the posting at the VA, thought maybe finally someone's taking this seriously. But now I'm here and I'm wondering if I made a mistake." Sarah's hands stilled. "What do you mean?" David met her eyes for the first time. His were gray-blue, bloodshot, carrying something that looked like desperation. "How much do they tell you? About what you're testing for?" "Environmental exposure," Sarah said carefully. "Long-term health impacts from service-related factors." Environmental exposure. He repeated it the same way BTR 4472 had, with that same weighted irony. "That's what they called it then too. Back in '91. When they gave us the pills." Sarah's pulse quickened. "What pills?" "The ones they said would protect us from chemical weapons, biological agents. We were heading into Kuwait, and they lined us up, handed out these pills, said it was experimental but safe. Said it was for our own protection. For national security." He laughed again, that hollow sound. "We trusted them. Why wouldn't we? They were our commanding officers. Our government." Sarah sat down slowly, still holding the prepared blood vials. "What happened?" "Some guys got sick right away. Nausea, dizziness, couldn't think straight. Others seemed fine at first. But over the years..." He trailed off, staring at his shaking hands. "Memory problems. Muscle pain. Fatigue that never goes away. Headaches that feel like someone's drilling into your skull. And the military kept saying it was stress. PTSD. All in our heads." "Did you report these symptoms?" "Reported them for 20 years. You know what they told me? Insufficient evidence. No causal link. Service-related disability denied." His voice cracked. "My marriage fell apart. Lost my job because I couldn't remember basic things, couldn't focus. Ended up living in my car for 6 months until the VA finally gave me a psych evaluation and some disability benefits. Not because they believed me about the pills. Because they decided I was crazy." Sarah's mind raced. She thought about all the participants she'd processed. The elevated vitals. The exhaustion. The way they all seemed to expect the security measures, the coded identifiers. "David," she said quietly. "Why did you volunteer for this study if you don't trust them?" "Because I'm dying anyway," he said simply. "My liver's failing. Kidneys aren't much better. The VA doctors can't figure out why. I don't drink, never did drugs. But my body's shutting down piece by piece, and I'm 51 years old." He looked at her directly. "I volunteered because I thought maybe, finally, they'd admit what they did. Maybe they'd study us properly. Find out what those pills actually were. Help the other guys who are sick. But now you think. Now I think maybe this isn't about helping us at all." He leaned forward, voice dropping. You know how many guys from my unit have died in the last 5 years? 12. 12 out of 43. Cancer, organ failure, suicide. All of them reported the same symptoms I have. All of them were told it wasn't service-related. Sarah felt cold. Have you told anyone about this? The study coordinators. You think they don't know? David's laugh was bitter. They know exactly who we are. Why do you think they're studying us? We're the evidence. We're the proof that something happened. But they're not studying us to help us. They're studying us to figure out how to cover it up better next time. That's... Sarah wanted to say impossible, but the word died in her throat. That's a serious accusation. Is it? David met her eyes. Let me ask you something. Do you know where these samples go? Do you know what they're testing for? Do you know who's funding this, really? The Department of Defense, Sarah said, but even to her own ears it sounded naive. Through how many contractors? How many layers? You think if something bad turns up in our blood, you'll hear about it? You think they'll publish those results? He shook his head. They said the pills were for national security. They said the secrecy was necessary. And we believed them because we were soldiers, and that's what soldiers do. Sarah's hands had gone numb. She thought about the locked containers. The classified facility address. The way participant BTR 4472 had disappeared from the schedule with no explanation. I need to draw your blood now, she said quietly. It's part of the protocol. I know. David rolled up his sleeve. Like I said, I'm dying anyway. Might as well contribute to their research. Maybe someone, someday, will look at all this data and figure out the truth. Even if it's 50 years from now. Even if we're all dead. Sarah drew the blood in silence. Her hands were steady, years of practice had made them reliable even when her mind was racing. She labeled the vials with his identifier code, KLM 8831. A human being reduced to letters and numbers. Thank you, she said when she finished, though she wasn't sure what she was thanking him for. Just. David paused at the door. Just remember we're people, okay? Whatever you're helping them do here, we're people. We served our country. We trusted our government. And something happened to us that they don't want anyone to know about. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the exam room for a long time. The vials of blood sat on the counter, dark red and accusatory. She thought about Michael Brennan's professional smile. About the phrase that kept appearing in all the documentation, national security requirements. She thought about 15 years of working in this building, drawing blood, filing results, trusting that the system worked the way it was supposed to work. And she wondered, for the first time, if she'd been complicit in something she didn't understand. The samples went into the locked container that evening, same as always. The courier arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, scanned the barcode, and left. Sarah watched her go, carrying away David Sullivan's blood, carrying away evidence of something Sarah couldn't name but could no longer ignore. That night, she opened her laptop and searched, Gulf War Syndrome experimental medications. The results filled her screen. Thousands of them. Testimonies. Studies. Congressional hearings. Denials. Admissions. Contradictions. A maze of information that somehow revealed nothing conclusive. She read until her eyes burned, until the words blurred together into a single overwhelming truth: something had happened to these men, and no one in power wanted to call it by its name. And now she was part of it, whatever it was. The question that kept her awake until dawn was simple and terrible: what was she going to do about it? Chapter 4, The Breaking Point. Sarah stopped sleeping well. She would lie awake in her too-large house, staring at the ceiling, thinking about blood samples and coded identifiers and men with trembling hands. During the day, she moved through her routines mechanically, but everything felt different now. Every participant she processed looked at her with eyes that asked silent questions. Every locked container she filled felt heavier than it should. She tried talking to Patricia about it, carefully, over coffee in the break room. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the DoD study participants?" Sarah asked, trying to sound casual. Patricia glanced up from her tablet. "Unusual how?" "They all seem sick. Really sick. And their symptoms sound similar." "Well, that's probably why they were selected for the study," Patricia said reasonably. "Cohort with common exposure history and symptoms. That's how epidemiological research works." It was a logical answer. It should have satisfied Sarah. But she pressed on. "Do we ever see the results from the analysis?" "I assume the data goes to the researchers running the study." "Why? Don't you think it's strange that we're collecting all these samples and we have no idea what they're testing for? No idea what they're finding?" Patricia set down her coffee, her expression shifting from casual to concerned. "Sarah, what's this really about?" Sarah wanted to tell her. Wanted to share what David Sullivan had said, wanted to voice her growing certainty that something was deeply wrong. But looking at Patricia's face, practical, rational Patricia who trusted the system because the system had always worked, Sarah realized how it would sound. Paranoid. Conspiracy-minded. The words of someone who was, as Mark had once said, creating drama from boredom. "Nothing," Sarah said finally. "I'm just tired." But she wasn't just tired. She was angry. An anger that had been building for weeks, fed by every vague answer and every locked container and every man who walked through her door with the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been failed by institutions they trusted. The breaking point came 3 days later. She was processing participant RDH 6293, a quiet man in his mid-50s who'd served in the First Gulf War. Routine blood draw, routine vitals, routine documentation. But as she was labeling the vials, he said something that made her hands freeze. "My daughter's getting married next month," he said softly. "I probably won't make it." Sarah looked up. "Why not?" "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. They gave me 6 months. That was 5 months ago." He smiled, but his eyes were wet. 48 years old, never smoked, ate healthy, exercised. The doctor couldn't explain it. "Just one of those things," he said. "Bad luck." "I'm so sorry," Sarah whispered. "You know what's funny?" He wasn't looking at her anymore, just staring at his hands. 3 other guys from my unit died of pancreatic cancer in the last 2 years. 3 out of 35. The VA said it wasn't service-connected. Said there was no pattern. He finally met her eyes. "But there is a pattern, isn't there? That's why we're here. That's why they're studying us." Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat had closed around words that wanted to come out but couldn't. "They won't find anything, though," he continued. "Or if they do, they won't tell us. They'll classify it. National security, right? Can't let the public know that we poisoned our own soldiers. Can't let other countries know what we were testing. So guys like me, we just die quietly, and our families get a flag and a thank you for your service." "I don't think," Sarah started, but he cut her off. "Yes, you do. I can see it in your face. You've figured something out, haven't you? You've realized this isn't about helping us." Sarah's hands were shaking now, just like his, just like David Sullivan's. She finished labeling the vials in silence, placed them in the container, and watched RDH 6293 leave. Watched a dying man walk away, still hoping that someone, somewhere, would acknowledge what had been done to him. That evening, Sarah didn't put the samples in the locked container right away. She sat in the lab after her shift ended, after the other techs had gone home, staring at those 3 vials of blood. She thought about Michael Brennan's professional smile. About consent forms that said to the fullest extent consistent with national security requirements. About 12 dead men from David Sullivan's unit. About stage 4 pancreatic cancer in a 48-year-old who'd never smoked. She thought about 15 years of trusting the system. Of doing her job. Of believing that following protocols meant doing the right thing. And then she did something she'd never done in her entire career. She violated protocol. Using her own equipment, not the study's tablet, she drew additional samples from the vials. Just a few drops from each. Enough to run basic tests without anyone noticing the volume difference. She labeled them with her own coding system, dates and times, nothing that could be traced to the study, and placed them in her personal storage in the lab refrigerator. Then she put the original vials in the locked container, logged them properly, and waited for the 6 p.m. courier. Her heart hammered as the courier arrived, scanned, and departed. She'd just committed what was probably a federal crime. Theft of government property. Violation of research protocols. Breach of security clearances she didn't even have. But she'd also taken the first step toward finding out the truth. That night, Sarah ran every test she could think of on those samples. Complete blood count. Metabolic panel. Liver enzymes. Heavy metal screening. Everything the lab equipment could analyze without specialized reagents. The results came back around midnight. She stared at the printouts, her coffee long cold, trying to understand what she was seeing. Elevated liver enzymes. Kidney dysfunction markers. And something else, something that made her pull up reference ranges 3 times to make sure she wasn't misreading them, significantly elevated levels of certain proteins associated with autoimmune disorders and toxic exposure. It wasn't conclusive. It wasn't proof of anything specific. But it was something. An abnormality. A pattern. She thought about Patricia's words, that's how epidemiological research works. But epidemiological research was supposed to help people. It was supposed to identify problems so they could be solved, publish findings so medicine could advance. This research was disappearing into a classified facility in Maryland, behind locked containers and coded identifiers and layers of contractors who could deny knowledge if anything ever came to light. Sarah pulled up her computer and began searching for someone who might listen. Someone who might care. Someone who had the authority and the courage to ask the questions she couldn't answer alone. Outside her window, Richmond slept. The city looked peaceful in the darkness, unaware that in a VA hospital lab, a medical technician was making a choice that would change everything. She found a name finally, buried in articles about Gulf War syndrome advocacy, Dr. Robert Chen, an epidemiologist who'd spent 20 years studying unexplained veteran illnesses, who'd testified before Congress, who'd published papers that government agencies had tried to suppress. Sarah drafted an email. Deleted it. Drafted another. Her hands shook over the keyboard. At 2:47 a.m., she finally hit send. The message was simple: I'm a medical technician working on a DoD-funded study. I think something is wrong. I think veterans are being harmed. I need help. Then she sat in the darkness and waited for dawn, knowing that whatever happened next, she could never go back to the comfortable ignorance of routine. She'd crossed a line. And there was no way back across it. Chapter 5, The Weight of Knowing. Dr. Robert Chen called her 3 days later. Sarah was in her car, sitting in the hospital parking lot during her lunch break, when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Ms. Chen. This is Robert Chen. I received your email. His voice was careful, measured. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. Thank you for calling, she managed. I need to ask you something first, he said. Are you aware that what you're describing could put you in legal jeopardy? Violation of research protocols, potentially breach of federal security regulations? Yes, Sarah said. I know. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. She did. The coded identifiers, the locked containers, the classified facility. David Sullivan and his trembling hands. The man with pancreatic cancer who wouldn't see his daughter's wedding. The test results she'd run in secret, showing patterns of toxic exposure and organ damage. Dr. Chen listened without interrupting. When she finished, the silence stretched so long she thought the call had dropped. Dr. Chen. I'm here, he said quietly. I've been documenting cases like this for 20 years. Symptoms, patterns, clusters of illness among veterans with specific service histories. And every time I get close to proving something, the data disappears. Funding gets pulled. Witnesses recant. Documents get classified retroactively. His voice carried the exhaustion of prolonged defeat. What you're describing sounds like what I've suspected for years. They're not studying these veterans to help them. They're studying them to measure the long-term effects of something they were exposed to deliberately. The pills, Sarah said. David Sullivan mentioned pills they were given. Pyridostigmine bromide, Dr. Chen confirmed. Officially approved as a pre-treatment for nerve agent exposure. Unofficially, given to thousands of soldiers with incomplete safety data, improper dosing protocols, and inadequate informed consent. The military has admitted to this, to a degree. But they've never acknowledged the full extent of the damage, because that would mean admitting they used their own soldiers as test subjects. Sarah felt sick. So this study is probably an attempt to gather data on long-term outcomes while maintaining deniability. They can't study these veterans openly without drawing attention to what was done to them. But a classified research project, hidden behind layers of contractors and security protocols. That gives them the data they need while keeping it out of public view. What do I do? Sarah asked. I have test results. I have participant testimonies. I have documentation. You need to be very careful, Dr. Chen said seriously. If you go public with this, they'll destroy your credibility. They'll question your methods, your motives, your mental stability. They'll make you look like a conspiracy theorist or a disgruntled employee. I've seen them do it to researchers with far more credentials than either of us. So I just do nothing. Keep processing these men like they're lab specimens. I didn't say that. He paused. But you need to understand what you're up against. This isn't about science or medicine or truth. This is about protecting institutions, about preserving the ability to operate in secret when national security requires it. The people running this study believe they're doing necessary work. They believe the sacrifice of a few hundred veterans is acceptable if it advances military medical research. That's monstrous. That's government, Dr. Chen said wearily. The question is whether you're willing to sacrifice your career, possibly your freedom, to fight it. Sarah sat in her car, watching people walk in and out of the hospital. Normal people, living normal lives, trusting that their government and their institutions functioned the way they were supposed to. The way she trusted, for 15 years. What happened to the veterans you documented, she asked. The ones you tried to help. Some got disability benefits, eventually. Some died waiting for acknowledgement. Some gave up trying to fight the system and just learned to live with their illnesses as best they could. His voice softened. But they knew someone believed them. They knew someone had listened. Sometimes that's all we can offer. After the call ended, Sarah sat in silence. She thought about RDH 6293, dying of cancer at 48. About David Sullivan and his failing organs. About BTR 4472, who disappeared from the schedule without explanation. She thought about the samples she'd collected, sitting in her lab refrigerator. Evidence of something she couldn't quite prove and couldn't quite ignore. That afternoon, she returned to the lab and processed 3 more study participants. She drew their blood, labeled it with their codes, logged it in the tablet. She followed every protocol exactly. And she collected additional samples for her own records, knowing it was illegal, knowing it probably wouldn't matter, doing it anyway because it was the only thing she could do. The study continued for another 6 months. Sarah processed 42 participants in total. She documented everything in a private journal, their symptoms, their stories, their test results. She sent updates to Dr. Chen, who compiled them with his own research, building a case that might never see the light of day. In May, the study ended as abruptly as it had begun. Michael Brennan sent a brief email thanking the staff for their participation. The secure tablet was retrieved. The locked containers stopped arriving. No results were ever shared. No findings were ever published. Sarah requested information through official channels. She was told the data was classified for national security reasons. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request. It was denied. She contacted her congressman's office. They sent a form letter thanking her for her concern. She thought about pushing harder, going to the media, making noise. But Dr. Chen's words echoed in her mind, "They'll destroy your credibility," and she realized that even if she went public, even if she screamed the truth from every platform available, most people wouldn't believe her. The story was too complicated, too conspiracy-minded, too easy to dismiss. So she kept working. Drawing blood, running tests, filing results. But she never forgot the 42 men she processed through that study. She kept their stories in her journal, their test results in her files. Evidence of something that officially never happened. Sometimes, late at night in her too-large house, Sarah wondered if she'd done enough. If she should have fought harder, risked more, made more noise. But then she would remember what Dr. Chen had said, * they knew someone believed them. They knew someone had listened, *. It wasn't justice. It wasn't healing. It wasn't even acknowledgement. But it was something. A record that existed, even if no one ever saw it. Proof that these men hadn't suffered in silence and obscurity, that someone had witnessed their pain and recognized it as real. 2 years after the study ended, Sarah received a letter. No return address, postmarked from somewhere in Arizona. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an obituary for David Sullivan. Below it, written in shaky handwriting, were 3 words, * thank you. KLM 8831. Sarah kept that letter in her journal, with all the other evidence no one would ever see. And she continued her work at the VA hospital, continued drawing blood and processing tests and maintaining the small mercies that made life bearable. Because in the end, that's all any of them had. Small mercies. Brief acknowledgements. The quiet certainty that someone, somewhere, had cared enough to remember. They'd said it was for national security. They'd said the sacrifice was necessary. They'd said the secrecy was justified. And maybe, to them, it was. But Sarah Chen knew the truth now, and she would carry it with her, a weight she couldn't share and couldn't put down. The weight of knowing. The weight of witnessing. The weight of caring when caring changed nothing. Outside her window, the sun set over Richmond. The city moved on, unaware. And in a file cabinet in Sarah's house, locked and hidden, 42 stories waited in silence. Waiting for a day that might never come, when someone with power would finally ask the right questions. When someone would finally say, "This was wrong. This should never have happened. These men deserved better." Until then, Sarah would remember for them. It was all she could do. It would have to be enough.